Geoff Watts, with a special middle name. Geoff, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Belgrade.
Thank you.
I understand your middle name is Mastery, or I'm wrong?
Not quite, no.
Would you care to share your middle name with us?
It's a very, very English name, Charles.
Are you related to...
You're not supposed to laugh.
You're not related to that Charles that we've been seeing in the media a lot, and also in The Crown and all sorts of things. No.
No. Do I look like I have royal blood? No.
You're a bit more handsome, I have to tell you that. Geoff, a few questions before I let you start. So you do the presentation. Please leave 10 minutes for the questions and answers. Everyone, use the Match About app for the Q&As with Geoff. If you don't manage to get your answers during the Q&A session, Geoff will be hanging around today in the coaching corner and in the venue, basically throughout the day, also tonight, so you will get your questions answered eventually. You will not be with us tomorrow, so it's better that we use the opportunity and shoot it all at you today already.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, Geoff, when we hear about a person from the UK, the first association is, oh yeah, he's got to be from London. But Geoff is not from London. You're from?
I'm from a town that I expect none of you will have heard of. It's called Cheltenham. It's in Gloucestershire, in the west of England.
Somebody has heard of it. Who's heard of it? We need a louder woohoo.
I used to live there.
Wow.
This is weird.
Yes. The last time I spoke to somebody was from America, and they said, I used to live in Cheltenham. I said, what? They're from Boston. And I said, I was at the Cheltenham football ground. We have a very small football team. When they got promoted into the 4th tier of English football. And I said, I was there too. He was from Boston, America, and I live in Cheltenham. And we were both at the same place on the same day. I was blown away. But yes, come on the Robins.
Awesome, thank you very much. You are in Belgrade for the first time, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we're talking about Virgin Alliance today, also Scrum Alliance. Thank you for that. And Geoff has agreed to buy drinks tonight, obviously, for people who guess something right and correct. And you said you're even happy with buying 2 people drinks.
Yes.
Me on top of it. Right? You know, we have to get drinks, right? And the question is, Geoff has been actually speaking a lot at different conferences and get-togethers and gatherings like this one, smaller, bigger, filmed, not filmed, whatever. And there have been at least 2 occasions, or specifically 2 occasions, in which Geoff came out to speak dressed as a movie character. Yeah, like movie, Hollywood things and stuff. So the question is, and we can have it in the Q&A, you know, whoever gets it first is the winner, or whichever 2 people get the first, they get drinks from Geoff tonight, and, you know, a special coaching session, you to Geoff or Geoff to you, whichever. So Geoff was dressed as 2 movie characters in 2 different occasions. Can you please guess which ones? And with that, I leave you to Geoff and to your masterful presentation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a bit more of a tricky one. So bear with me on this one. Zdravo. Divno je biti ovdje. Moje ime je Geoff Watts. Ja sam iz Engleske. Volim futbol I pivo. Govorit ću o majstorstvu. I hope that says what I've got written down here. The rest will be in English. But I did my best. As we said, I'm going to take Q&A at the end, hopefully. And however, if I talk too fast, if I talk too English, feel free to interrupt me and say, Geoff, can you say that again? Or can you say that differently? I'm more than happy to be interrupted. I do realize that I slip into some very strange English words now and again, and I will try my best not to. So, yeah, I'm here to talk to you about mastery. I would like to start off, and this is very easy for me to say, not necessarily easy for you to believe, but I promise, as an English person, my word, my honor, I won't pick on you if you raise your hand. But I would like to see people raise their hands, because I want to ask you a few questions. Has anybody heard of the term imposter syndrome? Raise your hand. Okay. Keep your hand raised if you think that applies to you somewhat. Okay. I'm not going to talk about imposter syndrome. All right? If you want to learn about that, you can read up about that, one of my books. Raise your hand if you've ever applied for a job where you haven't been fully qualified for. What about, so John asked about roles. He didn't ask about if anybody here was a coach. Is anybody here a coach? Coach of teams, coach of individuals? Quite a few. Anybody coach without coaching qualifications? Cool. I genuinely appreciate your honesty here. I'm trying to prove also that I'm not going to pick on you. My word is my bond. Have you ever been asked to take on a job without the training, the skills, and the support that you think is necessary to do that job? So imposter syndrome is a thing, okay? How we feel we aren't capable, qualified, experienced enough to do our job, that we're going to be found out, that we feel a bit of a fraud. But also, some of us are frauds in the nicest possible way. We are kind of making it up. We are kind of acting outside of our area of expertise. And I want to talk to you today about why that might be a good thing. It might be a bad thing. I think there's a lot more of it. And perhaps why we might need to address it as a community. That's my plan. So, 3 parts to my talk, not necessarily equal in length or weight, but the first is I just want to introduce you to this term, mastery. We all may have a different definition of that word as well, so I just want to clarify what I mean by the word mastery, give you a little bit of a history as to where it came from. I also then want to try and make a case for how this term is very relevant to the world of Agile, the world that we're operating in, how it's relevant to you and I. And then, as well as why I think it's something we need to address, I'm going to try and give you a few things that you can do. So just like Chris before me, I don't have all the answers, but I have some things that you might be able to try. So that's my plan. I have been told to wander around the stage a bit, so that the people taking photographs can take photographs, but I've also been told to try and stay here so the people taking video know where I am. So I'm going to try and mix it up a little bit. All right, so history, where does mastery come from? This is not a new concept, all right, the idea of mastery. We can go all the way back to ancient China, where in Confucianism, and this is 500 plus years BC, where people were taught that ethics is a good thing. Being a good person is a good thing. That's what we should be looking for. They valued scholarly learning. Really, really learning about what we want to do, not just how we do it, but who we are as a person as well. Not just China, the Greeks were quite impressed and quite stuck on excellence as well. They called it arete, and this idea of perfecting one's craft. Now that craft could be philosophy, it could be acting, it could be warrior, it could be anything. It doesn't matter what your craft was, but the idea was that you would do it to the best of your ability. You had the Lyceum, you had the Plato's Academy, where you went not just to do something for the fun of it, not just to be the best, but to be the best that you can be, and keep going for excellence. A little bit on in time, so 14th, 15th century, the idea of guilds, apprenticeships, where you as a student would learn your craft. You would study with somebody who was a master craftsman. Maybe you're a blacksmith, maybe you're a printer, Every trade would have their own guild. And after a certain amount of time and a certain amount of expertise, you might be able to call yourself a journeyman. Apologies for the gender pronouns there, that's just what they called them back then. And if you did well enough, maybe, if you could impress the guild enough, you might be able to progress to being a master craftsperson yourself. But it took a long time, decades of dedication to one particular craft. That mastery of a skill, that mastery of a craft, mastery of a trade. In India, we had the concept of the guru shishaya, where the guru is the teacher, shishaya is a student. They're not just going to school and learning information or knowledge. Again, they're learning ethics. They're learning how to be a good person. They're learning discipline. They're learning rigor from this master. The idea being that at the end of that relationship, you would have embodied everything that the master had to teach you. Very personal relationship. And in Japan, I'm not an expert in any of these things. Okay, I'm a bit of an imposter talking about Bushido and samurai. I'm not like Chris. I don't do martial arts. But again, the idea of discipline, the idea of honor was just as important as your sword skills. Mastery of something, dedication, a lot of hard work over a long period of time. So that is part of the history. Some of the history, a lot more modern, relatively speaking, is a little bit of what we say in England, an elephant in the room. Does that phrase translate okay? Something that's there but nobody really talks about. I kind of need to mention it because there is a very, very dark side to the word mastery. Now, I was introduced to a new word in the English language recently. Now, I'm aware that I'm talking to an audience where English isn't your first language. So the word contronym I was introduced to recently. It was a new word to me. Maybe it's a new word to you. You might have heard of synonym. So that means a word that is very similar in meaning to that other word. So warm and hot are synonyms. They mean similarly same thing. An antonym is the opposite. It has the opposite meaning. So cold is the opposite of warm, for example. Now, a contronym is a word that is the opposite of itself. So I can be bound to the spot, but I can equally bound across the stage. They mean the opposite thing, yet they are the same word. I think John introduced us to a couple of contronyms in his talk this morning. He used the word lightweight, a lightweight framework, which nobody wants to be a lightweight. I think there's lots of different, and I think mastery is a contronym. Because mastery has the negative connotations associated with the colonial slave trade, whereas I am a master of you, and you are my slave. Mastery meaning domination, ownership. And there's no getting away from that word, but equally mastery, true mastery, doesn't mean higher status, doesn't mean ownership or dominion. It means empowerment. True masters appreciate the implications of this and are really trying all of those mastery concepts that I talked about, the guru shishaya. It wasn't about mastering that person. It was helping that person master themselves. I'm in a state of privilege, okay? I'm fully aware, and, as Veronica said, I have a conflict of interest because some of my books have the word mastery in them. But equally, I think we shouldn't be shying away from this. I think we should be trying to reclaim the positive side of this word. I think we should be trying to get back to what the good side of mastery means. And the reason why I think we should be doing that is because I'm worried that Agile is becoming a contronym. So Agile is supposed to be about lightweight, responsiveness, lean, but it's becoming more heavy. It's becoming more disempowering. And I want to stop that. Not me personally, but I want us to stop that before it's too late. So why is it relevant? Well, trying to bring it a little bit more up to date. So this concept of mastery in education. Now we're talking 20th century. We're not talking medieval guilds. 20th century, a study found that when learning or when teaching, it's not so much about the teaching. It's not so much about me standing up here giving you a lecture and telling you what you need to know and passing on information. That's 10% of the knowledge retention. 70% of it comes from challenging assignments, doing something, hammering some molten metal, applying a technique in a retrospective, something difficult, having a tough conversation with your boss who is struggling to grant or enable greater autonomy. That's where a lot of the learning comes from, but not on its own. We need those developmental relationships as well, those people who can help us work those things through, analyze them, reflect on them, internalize them. Now, whether or not you believe this is relevant, this is reflective of your experience, I do, and it was taken on by a guy called Benjamin Bloom. You might not be familiar with Benjamin Bloom explicitly, but the fact that 5,000 people here have had some kind of certification, probably from the Scrum Alliance, means that you will have been exposed to some of Benjamin Bloom's work, whether you know it or not, because he came up with the Bloom's taxonomy. It started, he was nothing to do with Scrum. Sure you're not surprised about that. But he was looking at education in schools. And he defined mastery as not being able necessarily to recite your multiplication tables, not necessarily being able to recite rote learning, but to be able to take a concept and understand it well enough that you can apply it in non-textbook scenarios. So I can learn a formula about trigonometry, and I can recite it. Well, at one point in time I could. I'm not sure I could now. But that's not mastery. Mastery is being able to apply that theory to navigate your way home through the stars, or learn how far away off the coast a ship is. That is mastery of a concept. Equally, from an Agile perspective, I know what a daily Scrum is. Okay, I can ask the 3 questions, but can I really use that principle behind it to enable greater agility, greater team ownership, greater replanning within the team? Those are the concepts of real mastery that I think we've got away from a little bit. So if you're interested, this is Bloom's taxonomy. He talks about different depths of learning, using different words, different verbs, different adjectives. And it's not about just remembering, recalling facts. That's quite low down the level. Being able to create, be able to evaluate, be able to analyze. So Teaching for Mastery had a number of principles. Maybe as I'm going through these, some of them will resonate. Hopefully, 1 or 2 of them will. So not in any particular order, but Bloom recommended that when teaching children, teaching adults, we should tailor our teaching, because everybody learns in a different way, potentially. We should be patient, because some people take longer to internalize a concept. Sometimes it takes me longer for that metaphorical penny to drop, the light bulb to go off. Aha! So don't give up on people. Give them time. Perhaps different amounts of time for different contexts for different people. Go deep. We've touched on already. Be practical. Quite like this one as a practical person, somebody who likes making use of abstract games, dressing up as different characters, playing with Lego, things like that. But giving some people some things to do to put that learning into practice and reflect on it. This was a principle of mid-20th century education for mastery. And one that I want to focus on a little bit more is this concept of equalizing. So Teaching for Mastery, Bloom recommended trying to create an environment where we could equalize our ability for mastery. And I'm going to link this to John's point about making Agile more available, more accessible for all. Because I think mastery is more accessible for all rather than just the few. Now, I'll illustrate that slightly. So these graphs are taken from Bloom's work. He called this the difference between uniform and varied instruction. And I'll illustrate this with a small example, personal example. My daughter, when she was at school, 10 years ago, I think, she started to learn Mandarin, Chinese. And she quite enjoyed it. She was pretty good at it. So much so that my wife and I and our family, we went out for dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and my daughter started talking to the waiter in Mandarin. The waiter was very impressed that this young white child with no visible connection to that part of the world was able to communicate with him and wanted to communicate with him. She was very proud, we were very proud. At the end of the year, she got top marks in her exam in Mandarin. Amazing. Next year, however, she had a different teacher. And my daughter's marks started dropping. She wasn't happy. She didn't want to go anymore. So we went in to see the teacher. And we said, just want to know what's going on. How can we help? And the teacher said, Freya is not responding to my teaching methods. I said, okay, interesting. So what can we do about that? Freya needs to respond to my teaching methods. Now, obviously, I had a bias, I had an interest, because this was one of the people I love most in the world. So I'm very biased towards her. But my first thought was, you are a native Mandarin speaker. You've been teaching this for a long time. My daughter's been doing this for 1 year. Wouldn't it be better if you adjusted what you did rather than she adjusted what she did? And her response was, no, this is how I do it. This is how I am successful. Freya either changes or she leaves. And she left. Never spoke another word of Mandarin again, despite having the talent, having the ability, and having the passion. And I found that sad. She fell in to this left-hand side of this bell curve. By teaching in a uniform way, some people, a small proportion, will excel. They will reach mastery. Some will fall by the wayside. The majority will be somewhere in between, but they won't get to mastery. Bloom argued this idea of a 2 sigma problem. He said that if you vary the instruction, you can positively skew the achievement quite considerably. The downside is that requires quite a lot of effort from the teachers. They have to adapt. They have to meet the students where they are, rather than expecting the students to meet them where the teacher is. So you've heard VUCA. Chris talked about VUCA. I want to laugh in the face of VUCA. I'm not sure I can, though, because it is real. So for those of you that aren't familiar with VUCA, we have volatility. The speed and the degree and the unpredictability of change is fast and increasing. We have huge amounts of uncertainty, which Chris said is very stressful, very painful. Complexity is difficult because we don't know what's going to be true today is true tomorrow. We have ambiguity as well, which means what's true for me might not be true for you. This depends on how you look at it. Depends on the context. But that's not just the world we're operating in now. We're operating in a hybrid world. Some of the questions in the Q&A earlier on, how do we deal with this when most of our teams are working remotely and they never see each other physically? That's another complexity. It's another addition. And then, of course, you can't go to a conference or a meetup or even a conversation these days with somebody talking about AI. I'm not an AI expert. I'm not going to be talking a lot about it. But it's part of the environment that we're operating in now, this uncertainty, this fear associated with all these different unknowns, uncontrollables. So how do we deal with that? Well, I think it's relevant because of those factors. Let's just think. Right, here we go. So hopefully when I was going through those 5 principles of teaching for mastery, hopefully there were some little bells that went off. Okay, yeah, I think that's relevant. So patience is important. Remember on that slide it said patience. Some people take longer to get there. I think there's a huge, huge overlap with the core of agility. Sustainable pace. One of those principles that John had on his slide earlier on from the Agile Manifesto. Sustainable pace. Take your time. If you don't take your time, quality will suffer. Quality of product, quality of software, quality of learning, quality of life. So patience, sustainability is a key overlap between mastery and agile. There's another one around perfect, then advance. Now there's a potential paradox here that I will come back to shortly. But essentially what this means is learn one thing well before moving on to the next thing. Get one thing done before moving on to the next thing. Limit your work in progress. Focus. Don't overcommit. I'll come back to that again from the other angle shortly, but the third thing I think there's a huge overlap in. Now, I may well be undermining myself here slightly, but trying to live up to my own claims. But Bloom talked about lectures, or when the teacher is at the front of the class, the primary purpose of that shouldn't be about instruction. It should be about inspiration. It should be about motivation. It should be about sparking a desire to learn themselves, sparking a curiosity. And hopefully, some of you will be, well, I say hopefully, to begin with, unfortunately, I'm sure some of you are familiar with somebody turning up to the team and saying, I've got a user story for you. As a user, I want you to give me all of my stuff now. Or, this is what I want you to do, and giving you a very, 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 very deep and in-depth list of requirements and criteria. Not the point of a user story, as we all know, but hopefully you will have had some experience of somebody turning up with a user story that defines the problem that needs to be solved, not the solution. Starting to try and engage this intelligent, cross-functional, inspired, engaged, motivated, self-managing team to collectively unfold and emerge and evolve a solution to that problem. This is what Bloom was talking about in a classroom 70, 80 years ago. I think there's a huge overlap with what we're trying to do there. Oh, and I've gone one step too far. So those little smiley faces, I'm going to link back to Chris as well. Again, he used the word feedback. Feedback is integral in what we're doing in an agile space. We try and reduce the gap. John mentioned it as well, mind the gap. Reduce the amount of time between doing something and getting some feedback on it. That could be from your customer. It could be just yourself. Just reflecting on, how have I done here? How am I doing with regards to what I wanted to do? Not in a, I'm going to beat myself up, bad Geoff, in your bed, but more okay, this is interesting. Bloom talked a lot about that as well. There's no point just doing something if you don't reflect on it, if you don't get some feedback on it. And all of those direct relationships through history around mastery, there was a huge element of feedback that was embedded in that. So why do I think this is important? Well, I'm making a bold claim that I think respect for Agile is on the decline quite rapidly. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I'm aware that it might be becoming a contronym. We've had a lot of failed transformations. We've had a lot of organizations say, we're going to do this Agile thing. We're going to have an Agile transformation. And it hasn't worked. Work is another contronym. I think we've got a lot of expensive, unqualified people out there calling themselves Agile coaches, Agile consultants, people who've got a lot of letters after their name, badges, but not a huge amount of deep experience. I think safe is a symptom of this, making Agile a contronym, but not just the framework itself, but the infighting that goes along with it. The fact that there doesn't seem to be a good level of alignment with our values of respect and collaboration, which we profess but don't necessarily demonstrate. You'll have heard the phrase Agile certification complex. This idea, John mentioned it, that you can go on a class for 2 days and get a certificate that implies you are a master, no matter how many people say it's not, and I've been there. Okay, I've said you can now have a license to be dangerous. Turns out there was a lot more danger in there than we thought. So there's a lot of reasons. Now, as well as I think those things having potentially negative impact on the perception of Agile and agility, I don't think any of those things are inherently bad. I think there is value in getting a certification from a 2-day class. It helps It creates awareness. It helps give some level of skill, appetite, enthusiasm for more, recognition of something. I think actually having expensive, underqualified people out there calling themselves coaches and consultants has a positive side, because we're not out there professing that we do know everything. We shouldn't, because we don't. So if we can put that vulnerability out there, that even somebody who's putting themselves forward as somebody who can help you because they have the skills to help, but they're quite explicitly saying, I'm not an expert either, that sends a very positive message. I think my concern is a lot of those people aren't saying that. I think they are saying, I know what I'm talking about. I can sell you something that works. But they are not inherently bad in themselves. I want to introduce you to another one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto. Does anybody know who this person is? Yeah. Answering my question without any risk. Good for you. This is Kent Beck. You might know him from such things as extreme programming or software craftsmanship on previous episodes. And I've gone too far again. So Kent, I'm bringing Kent in here because he is and has been and still is an advocate for quality. Extreme programming was formed largely because of a reaction to the consequences of an unsustainable pace, a lack of collaboration, and the death march of multiple projects. Kent and others like him tried to make the case for higher quality will lead to better results. But as you can see from the quote here, he quite openly admits that that's not necessarily an easy case to make. There are too many bad products out there. There is too much bad software that actually makes a profit, that is commercially successful, to be able to say with confidence that investing in quality is a good thing. And that's a difficult situation for us to be in. Now, I'm putting this out there for a couple of reasons. One is that what I'm saying here is not new, okay? Kent has said this many years ago. Alistair Coburn has said this. Lots of people have said we should be focusing on this. Right? Our first talk this morning, we don't need an Agile Manifesto version 2. Version 1 is good enough if we focus on technical excellence. If we focus on the principles in there, we will get back to quality. But the other point that I want to bring up with this slide is you're operating in a system that potentially incentivizes and rewards poor quality. So that is a difficult position for you to be in and stand up and take a stand for high quality. This is an overly dramatic quote that I popped in at the last minute, because one of the points that I want to make is it's very easy to blame the system. It's very easy to blame leaders, like Chris was saying earlier on. But they are human, okay? The system is imperfect. It's normal. We can only affect what we do. So my call to action here is that we can all take a small step towards a greater work towards mastery in our own way. That's all we can hope to do, but it will be enough if enough of us do it. There are some paradoxes that I'd like to slightly address, or potential paradoxes that I would like to address. So MVP, minimum viable product. Somebody told me the other day that Agile as a community has had a high degree of arrogance. And what they meant by that was, we've got a history of taking concepts from somewhere else and assimilating them into what we do with surface level knowledge, which requires very low levels of understanding, not mastery. So as a community, I think we've misused the term MVP. MVP was never meant to be the dirtiest thing you can get away with quickly. It wasn't. But that's how a lot of us have used it. Fail fast. Wasn't meant to be screw up as quickly as you can. All right? And we've contributed to this in our own way. You know, we've got books out there that say twice the work in half the time and all this time, which is sending the wrong messages. MVP was never meant to be about shit. Thin, yes. Ruthlessly work out whether this is a problem worth solving, whether this is value. Is this even possible? Yes. The shittest thing that we can get out the door and hopefully patch it up later? No. But we've become that. So there is a potential paradox of mastery and MVP, the way we look at it, going the wrong way. Most of you will have heard of the concept of T-shaped people. Historically, we've been trained to be very I-shaped. I am an expert in what I do. This is who I am, and I'm damn good at it. So if you've got a problem in this area, I'm your person. And Agile comes along and says, we need to be a little bit more cross-functional. You know, we need to get stuff done. It's not about you doing your bit anymore. You, as a member of a cross-functional team, need to do what the team need of you to be able to deliver ultimate holistic value. So I might need to step outside of my area of expertise. And we call that becoming a little bit more T-shaped, because I have my I-shaped specialism, but I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, not brilliantly, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, where the team need me to. Now, the argument why this is a paradox, a lot of people would say to me, okay, Geoff, so you have the choice between being a really expert I-shaped person, deep level of mastery in that particular skill, or you could do slightly less of that and learn some of this stuff, but not very well, so you're undermining your mastery. You are no longer mastering a skill. You're becoming more T-shaped. This is their argument. I think it's a paradox, because in a complex system, the more that I can understand how these other aspects interface with my main skill gives me greater levels of mastery, as Bloom would define it, of being able to apply my theoretical level of expertise to more abstract, different circumstances. It deepens my skill set by knowing how it contributes to the bigger system. Coming back in history again, we're not looking at becoming blacksmiths. We're not looking at becoming masters in one skill. The world we're in probably does require us to focus on mastery in a different kind of way. A little bit more like your Da Vinci's, your Michelangelos, who weren't just sculptors, who weren't just expert painters, who weren't just great physicists. They were great at lots of things. Now, okay, maybe you could look at those people and say they're freaks. They're the exception. They're the geniuses. They're the polymaths. But to a degree, we need to be a little bit more like that. We need to be a little bit more pie-shaped, perhaps, or comb-shaped, as they say these days, than T-shaped. As an example, Agile coaches. This is the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. Part of the Scrum Alliance have helped sponsor this. Looking at all the different skills, all the different capabilities that an Agile coach needs to have in their toolbox, according to the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. Does that mean we need to be a 10 out of 10 in all of those areas? No. But it does mean that we can't afford to be a 10 or an 11 out of 10 in just one. We can't just do. We can't just be someone who sits around and asks powerful questions all the time. We need to have different skills. So you're probably looking at some kind of shape that is different to somebody else who is also a master, expert, agile coach, but a different shaped agile coach. Now this is complexity, this is difficult to have a conversation about, it's difficult to standardize. But in a VUCA world, we probably can't standardize a lot of these things. But that doesn't excuse us from really going deep in our learning. I have a little bit of a bugbear around roles. John asked about roles this morning, what roles do we got? I asked about roles. And there's a very strong argument these days that we're moving away from roles, we're moving into more skills, more capabilities, a more accountabilities type world rather than roles. And maybe I'm a dinosaur. Maybe I'm becoming obsolete. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. But I think if something is somebody's job, they take responsibility for it. So part of my issue with the watering down of agility is to do with roles. So one of the latest changes to the Scrum Guide took away the idea of a Scrum Master as a role, a Product Owner as a role, looking at accountabilities instead. And theoretically, I think that's a good thing, because we should all be servant leaders. We should all be looking to remove impediments. We should all be looking to facilitate and coach, all that kind of stuff. But if nobody has that as a role, does anyone really take that seriously? This is a question I'm wondering. We're not getting masterful at a particular thing that is of service and of value to the team and the organization. I think this is a problem. I can understand why. Now, I used to stand up on stage, and one of the things I would talk about is, and complain about, because I'm one of these British people, we stand around and complain about, usually the weather, but other things. Okay, and I would stand around and I would talk about how having a proxy product owner is a terrible thing, it's a dangerous thing, we need real product owners with our teams. I find myself now shaking my head at not even proxy product owners anymore, but product owner GPTs. People who will get ChatGPT up and they will ask them to generate me some user stories, please, and fill out this lean canvas for me, please, and if these are my features, prioritize them for me, please. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but people don't seem to fact check the bare minimum thing of fact checking what you're getting back. Bear in mind that these AI models at the moment are taking what human beings are putting into them. And human beings have a wide view of right and wrong and quality. I think we do need to leverage AI, but I don't think it's an excuse to just delegate some of that. I did a little bit of experimentation. So I had a workshop that was coming up. It was on conflict, running a conflict navigation workshop for a group. And I thought, okay, well, let's see what this ChatGPT thing's all about. And I wanted to know what other kind of conflict models that I might not be aware of, how I might be able to add more to my facilitation or my teaching game. And fair enough, ChatGPT came up with a model that I was unaware of, that I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I thought I'd do a little bit more research on it. And it turns out, yes, ChatGPT was correct. This was indeed a valid, validated and verified conflict model. However, the 5 aspects of the model that ChatGPT gave me were not the 5 aspects of the model that the person who created it came up with. I see a lot of people who don't even do that basic level of fact-checking. And I get why, because we're all under pressure. We feel a bit like an imposter. Everything needs to be done now or yesterday. It's very difficult, as Chris said, to say, I don't know, and ask for help. But it's becoming, I think, quite a big problem. Now, Kent Beck was talking about quality, and he said, unfortunately, I've decided that there's a lot of bad quality out there, so I can't any longer say with any certainty that good quality increases value and is a good thing. It's a very hard thing to find evidence that says no technical debt is a good thing. That high levels of quality, that agile principle of continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. There's very little hard data out there that says that is a business value bottom line thing. Therefore, this slide is blank. However, there is, and you will have, I'm sure, come across, if not statistical and scientific evidence, at the very least, anecdotal evidence, that in most cases, compromising quality will eventually catch up with you. This is my friend Nigel. Some of you may know him. Somebody else who has spoken on stage in costume. Nigel and I used to work together at British Telecom. Nigel is a diabetic. Or I think you say Nigel has diabetes, because he is more than just a diabetic. But for the purposes of this story, Nigel is a diabetic. And that thing you can see on screen there is an implant that he has that monitors his blood sugar automatically. It's connected to his phone, so he scans it or something, and it tells him his blood sugar level, and if it's low, he can give himself some more insulin or what have you. So Nigel is one of many, many people who use this type of device to monitor and maintain healthy living. Why am I telling you this? Well, it turns out that in the UK, possibly more than the UK, there are two products, as Nigel calls them, the Pepsi and the Coke of the devices, okay? Let's just say Nigel has the Pepsi version, okay? And so Nigel's device doesn't have real-time notifications. He has to actually do something to get that reading. The other device does, but switching them isn't just as simple as putting a battery in or changing your SIM card. So his company, his devices company, decided that it would be a good thing to upgrade their functionality and add a feature that would enable real-time information. The bad news is it didn't work. The even worse news was that it actually broke what was already there. So Nigel's device, like many other people's, was now didn't just not have the new feature, but didn't work at all. And they didn't have a good rollback plan either. They didn't have great version control, so they couldn't just revert back to the previous version. So thousands of people who were relying on this device to manage and maintain their level of blood sugar, oh, there's an angry Nigel, okay, were now left with the equivalent of a brick. Now, I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to, again, take something from what Chris said earlier on, I'm pretty sure that no one involved in that piece of work wanted that outcome for their users. I'm also pretty sure that everyone involved in that piece of work wanted a positive experience. And yet, this happened. So whose fault was it? Was it the developers who didn't have good engineering practices, didn't have good rollback plans, didn't have good tests? Was it the management who told them they had to get this product, this feature out by this date? Well, whose fault was it? But does it matter whose fault it was? Because in a complex environment, it's very easy to say, wasn't me, Gov. It's the system. All right? But we're all part of that system. So the more complex, the bigger the piece of work, the easier it is to say, well, it wasn't my fault. And this is one of the concerns that leadership have, and it's something that we all need to take greater accountability for. You know, we need to take some level of responsibility. We all do, for the quality levels that we're doing. Okay, so very quickly. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on this because I do want to leave some time for questions. The concept of the locus of control. Has anybody heard of that? A few people nodding their heads, most people saying something to do with Xboxes. No, nothing to do with Xboxes. The locus of control is about how much control we believe we have over our destiny. So if I believe that what I do has a positive material impact on me and the outcome, then I have an internal locus of control. If, however, I believe that it doesn't really matter what I do, it's all down to fate, down to luck, down to what other people do, the system, I have an external locus of control. Now, the reason I'm bringing this in here is because we will only do something about the system that we're operating within if we believe we can have an impact, if we have an internal locus of control. And it's very easy for our internal locus of control to be eroded, to be beaten down by what we see. Oh, we tried this and management did this anyway. What's the point? I voted, but this person still got in anyway. What's the point? That type of thinking. So we need to try and work on our internal locus of control if we're going to have any kind of impact whatsoever. We need to take accountability for our own careers. We need to work out what we can do about our situation. You are here. You are part of the good, okay? Because you are taking your time to come and learn. You aren't waiting for somebody else to solve the problem. You're thinking, how can I make things better? I'm going to go and learn. Unfortunately, you turned up to my talk today, so you're limited in what you're learning. But, there are other good people here today and tomorrow. So you will learn. You need to make sure that what can you take? You can learn. You can take some books. You can go to conferences. You can get some coaches. You can get some mentors. You can watch video. You can learn your own thing. You can take accountability for that. Yes, there's only so many hours in a day, but take pride in your depth of learning. Don't worry about anybody else for now. But then recognize that mastery is a team sport. If nothing else, absolutely, reflect on what you're doing. 10 years experience is not the same as 1 year experience 10 times. Okay? Do something different, but also reflect on it. Get other people to reflect on it and to give you feedback. If you're a coach, have a coach. Have some coaching supervision. Ask people their opinion and create an environment where they can tell you the truth. This kind of learning is painful, but it's necessary. Embrace your imposter. It might sound like a strange thing to say, but our imposter syndrome gives us benefits. It enables us to focus on getting better. Okay, I, like Chris, stress about giving a talk. That stress forces me to practice. It forces me to rehearse. It forces me to give this talk to other people and inspect and adapt it. I can embrace that level of imposter. If I didn't, I would just turn up here and given you something, but no idea that it would be any good at all. But also, give yourself some credit. All right, I'll come back to that again in a minute. What else have we got? Reflect. And again, something else that I was really pleased to hear Chris and John both say. Enjoy the journey. You are never going to be a master. You're always going to be a student. So enjoy that process. It's far too tempting to say, I will be happy when I have mastered this. I will be happy when I have got this promotion. I will be comfortable when I know everything. You won't ever do that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try. I wanted to get John's blessing to say this, because I had an idea, but I wasn't sure whether he would agree with this. If, part of the question that I asked in the Match About app, if they'd have known back in 2001 in Snowbird that all of the things that they wanted, if they'd have wanted higher quality, they wanted to end the death march, if they wanted lighter weight frameworks, if they'd have known that in 20 odd years they'd have ended up with SAFe, would they have still bothered? And I think they would, because they believed in it. Even if they thought it wasn't going to be ultimately successful, it was the right thing to do. And that's, I think, something that we probably need to do a little bit more of as a community, as a group, but only you can do this, okay? Now, I can't force you to take action. I can't force you to do anything. And Chris quite rightly said, you can't force somebody to change, okay? But what I can do is I can give you the opportunity. I can enable you to do a little bit of reflection, if nothing else. So learn, absolutely, so your actions are informed. Reflect on that learning. How did it go? How could it do better? And then make some changes. I can give you some space to reflect. Now, this is going to be a really awkward 60 seconds because I'm going to expect silence. All I want you to do in that 60 seconds is I just want you to think of one thing that you personally could do to improve your focus on mastery. That's it. 60 seconds. Starts now. Okay, well done. Thank you for sitting in silence. Again, I'm not going to ask anybody to share. If you do want a little bit of a trick, something else that you can do is tell somebody. Not now, but tell somebody what you plan to do. Somebody that you care about, ideally. Because then you've got an extra level of accountability. And we can be our own accountability buddies on our journey towards mastery that will never end. Yes, the world is full of idiots. I can't solve that for you. A lot of those idiots are idiots simply because they don't realize they're idiots. The good news is, all of us in this room, we realize we're idiots. Okay? And we're doing something about it. You have doubts. I know Chris talked about FUD and fear and uncertainty and doubt. We all have those doubts. But you are part of the wise because you are acknowledging that you have those doubts and you're doing something about it. Keep doubting. Not to a paralyzing level, but just keep doing that. And don't panic. You don't have to do it straight away. Everybody else is experiencing the same thing. And that's me. So we can see what questions we've got. And hopefully that, oh, there we go, magic. How to deal with the common practice of developers being titled seniors, which implies mastery, after 3 to 4 years of experience. So you're operating within a system, okay? You can't necessarily change all the system straight away. That's okay. I think actually the Scrum Master role was the first real role designed for the VUCA world. It was the first role that explicitly said, this is somebody who doesn't know, who isn't there to tell you the answer, who is there to actually facilitate uncertainty. You might not be able to redesign your own job title, but what do you have control over? You do have control over how you introduce yourself. You do have the control over how you show up. There's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, my job title says senior, but all that really means is, I know more about what I don't know than you do. I've just learnt more of the unknowns. Doesn't mean I have more answers, but I've become a lot more comfortable with uncertainty and asking for help. Because that's what we're trying to master now, is being able to not just sit in uncertainty and complexity ourselves, but make it easier for other people to sit in their uncertainty and complexity as well. And that's where that seniority, I think, comes in. Tying into Chris's point, it might require some coaching of other people, but equally, start with you. What can I role model here? How can I make it safer for other people? How to prevent AI from ruining the craving for mastery between junior staff. I don't feel qualified at all to talk about AI, really. I've just shared with you a couple of anecdotes about my personal experience. It's going to be really interesting. Really interesting. I have one of my favorite phrases is, it's not good, it's not bad, it's interesting. Because if we can take the judgment out of a situation, whether it be our actions or somebody else's actions, and just think, oh, this is interesting, we're more open-minded, we're less critical. So I think looking at the factors that make this a challenge, that's going to be interesting. I was talking at dinner last night about the youth. To be honest, in my head, I'm still 23, all right? But the fact that I've got a 21-year-old daughter means that I can't be. So the young, the youthful, I worry because I think what I would feel if I were 21 again. But for my 21-year-old, my 17-year-old, this is fine. This is normal, okay? My 4-year-old, God knows what the world's going to be like for him when he's 17, 18. All I can do is think, well, what I would feel like that. But they're not going to feel like that. So embrace that. I think Chris also mentioned about neurodiversity. I once went on record as saying that every Scrum team should have a 5-year-old in them. Because the 5-year-olds ask the best questions. Why is the moon broken? All right. Do bridges like this sometimes break when you're at the top of a bridge? That was yesterday's. So I think bring those people in more. Ask them what they think. Ask them how they think they're going to deal with it, how we can do it. Ask their advice would be one piece of advice there. How can we also apply the elements of Krathwohl's taxonomy and Harrow's taxonomy alongside Bloom's mostly cognitive approach in modern business and teams? That's a very clever question. Too clever for me, I think. For me, I have it. So one of my favorite phrases is not good, it's not bad, it's interesting. Another of my favorite phrases is all models are wrong, but some of them are quite useful. So I would take all of those models very, very loosely and think, how can we apply some of this stuff that was created 80, 100, 2,000 years ago and apply some of it to our context? Throw away what doesn't work, but be sure that it is worth throwing away first. Try and get past your cognitive biases of, well, it's different, it's new, it's challenging, it's hard, therefore it can't be right. And I have to admit, I don't know about those two other taxonomies. So I would have to do some research before giving my opinion on that one. It would be disingenuous for me to do otherwise. Can quality be maintained in the hybrid work environment? What steps can we take to improve the responsibility for the quality of work? So one thing that I was really interested in about the whole hybrid thing is when I wrote my first book, so this was 12 years ago, way before the pandemic, way before Zoom, my editor was based in America. I still, to this day, have never met her. My designer was based in Oslo. I still, to this day, have never met him, and he has never met my editor. My reviewers were based all around the world, some of which I never met. They never met each other. So I have full confidence that remote working can lead to success, can lead to quality. Doesn't always reduce things. I do also believe, however, it makes it harder for a number of reasons, not least of which that level of personal accountability. If I turn up to work and I look somebody in the eye and say, yeah, I didn't do what I said I was going to do yesterday, that feels harder than sending a message on Slack. So there's less personal accountability. And I think actually peer pressure is a big part of successful teams. I think we don't want to let our teammates down. We're more likely to have a successful team, a successful product. We're more likely to hold ourselves to account and hold each other to account. But it is possible. So we need to increase that level of bonding, with that level of commitment, that level of inter-team accountability. Peer pressure, in a way. The good news is we've got huge numbers of tools and high levels of technology that can help us with that weren't there before. So we need to leverage that without letting the tool drive the process. That's the balance that most teams are still struggling to find right now, in my opinion. And I think that's all we've got time for because I'm being told to shut up.
Horrible space police here who takes care of the time
Yeah.
and also takes care of your tummies, everybody's tummies around here. So thank you, Geoff. This has been truly, truly amazing and very different and quite masterful, let's put it that way. And for those who were wondering what Geoff was looking like at some of the events where he was presenting, Alexander got it right. So you were the Joker, right?
Yes.
And a lot of people like warm, hot, so you're in the right movie, but you still need to look for the right character. Let's put it that way. Okay. So anyways, Geoff's going to open up for drinks for Alexander and also for another person who gets to the right character of the movie, which has been named several times in your answers. The lunch is served upstairs. There is some very nice finger food, really, really yummy things for your tummy. Smokers do it outside, and let's convene here at 2:15 sharp, like Japanese 2:15, huh? which should give us almost an hour. Cheers.
Thank you.
Satisfied?
Yeah.